Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. You are live with Endeavor Gaming, and today we're going to be taking a look at my experimental build on the Lexington Class Dreadnought. So let's just go on ahead and get into it. The complete technical capabilities of this modern flagship of the Terran Empire are a well-guarded secret, known only to a select few within the Emperor's trust. Yet despite the closed lips, it is no secret that the ship is versatile and unpredictable, often emerging victorious and relatively unscathed from battle, even when the odds are stacked in her enemy's favor. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the build. Starting with our four weapons, we have the Enhanced Biomolecular Photon Torpedo Launcher. This comes out of the 8472 Reputation, and this is going to be a nice two-piece set with one of the turrets we're running in the rear, and we'll get to that one a little bit later. But this two-piece set is giving us a 7.5% bonus to our phaser damage, which is a nice to have. I tend to run it on all of my phaser builds, so that's not a huge surprise. Next, we have the Phaser Wide-Angle Dual Heavy Beam Bank. This comes out of the Discovery Reputation. It's one of my favorite phasers in the game. It's got a wide firing arc and it hits hard. It's also going to be part of a two-piece set with a console we'll get to later, but let's go ahead and check out that two-piece set real quick while we're here. We have War Discretion, which is on crit, a 1% crit severity buff for 20 seconds, stacks up to 25 times. So every time we get a crit hit, we're adding to our crit severity up to 25%. Very nice to have. Going next, we have a departure from my normal beam overload builds. We have the Terran Task Force dual heavy cannons as well as the Agony Phaser quad cannons. So the big standout of this build is I want to try a hybrid between beam overload and cannon scatter volley. So we're running two of my favorite cannons, the Terran Task Force having a great proc, as well as the Agonies, which I'm having a lot of fun with. If you have the chance to pick up the Adamant, I highly recommend it, even just for these cannons, because they're basically the quad phaser cannons, but better. There's no other way to describe them. They're a ton of fun, and you'll get to see them in action soon enough. Moving on to the deflector, we have an Elite Fleet Intervention Protomatter Deflector Array. This comes from the Colony Fleet Holding, and it's got the modifiers for Colony Crit, Control Expertise ×2, EPS, and then Shield Cap Control Expertise. So that last mod can be changed based on what you wanted. I think I just ran out of dilithium re-rolling it, so I stuck with Shield Cap Control Expertise. I go for the Control Expertise for a trait we'll get into a little bit later, and the Colony crits. I mean, if you look at the bottom of the tooltip, 15% crit severity based on hull and a 4% crit chance boost based on hull. Always nice to have, and that can potentially go up if you're able to scale your hull up more in combat. Moving on to Impulse, this one is a fairly standard one. Most of my builds are using it now. I've gotten really used to the competitive engines. Competitive reputation engines, the prevailing innervated impulse engines. When you activate a firing mode, you get a huge boost to your speed, and on a ship like this that's a little bit bigger and a little bit slower than what I normally fly, amazing to have. Moving on to Warp, we're running the Terran Task Force Quantum Capacitor Warp Core, so I'm not really running any space set here. I really just went for things that help weapons. You know, getting 3.3 all damage per subsystem with 75 or more on a Miracle Worker ship, obviously I'm doing that a lot. And then 7.5% of my weapon power to my shield power is bonus power. Pretty nice to have. You also got the Starship Weapon Subsystem Performance. You know, it's good for weapons and I'm using it. And then shields, same deal. Revolutionary Covariant Shield Array because 7.6 directed energy weapon damage based on Aux power. Again, while it is low resting, Miracle Worker ship, we're buffing that up all the time. On a ship like this, I find that working with 4-4 is a little bit more difficult than 5-3. You know, when you have 3 weapon slots, it's really easy to make up my mind. But filling in a 4th aft weapon slot is sometimes pretty hard for me. Because if you put in a beam, you're really not going to get a lot out of it. Because it's not going to fire unless you're facing away from your enemy. And I don't like doing that. So, going on to our aft weapons, we've got a sensor-linked phaser turret. This is very hard to pick up. You could change this out with basically any other phaser turret if you wanted to. I'm using this one because weapon amplification is just a nice to have. Plus, its proc is awesome. 3% chance for a 1% crit chance buff to self for 15 seconds, and that stacks up to 3 times. Moving on, we've got the heavy bimolecular phaser turret, again from 8472 reputation, and filling out the 2-piece set with the torpedo we talked about earlier. We've got the trilithium omnidirectional phaser beam array. Now this is also going to make up a 2-piece set with a console we'll get to later, so let's check out that 2-piece set now. 5% firing cycle haste for energy weapons, and 15% to flight speed. Again, this isn't a particularly fast ship, so anything we can get in the flight speed is going to be great, and firing cycle haste is always nice. And lastly, another expensive one, but we've got the sensor-linked omnidirectional phaser beam array. Again, I talked about it. I love the passives and the proc on this. If you don't have a sensor-linked omnidirectional phaser beam array, you could always use a crafted one, or try to buy one of the lockbox ones that's less expensive. So I think the pulse phasers are selling for a little bit less than this one right now. The integrity linked would also be good if you want a little bit more survivability. There's also the covert phasers, which will reduce that on just the weapon, but what you can get your hands on is always going to be good. Taking a quick look at devices here, we've got energy amplifiers, bonus energy weapon damage, of course, deuterium surplus, again, gotta help that speed wherever we can. We've got a red matter capacitor. I tend to only use this in a last case scenario. With something I'll get into later, if I have a subsystem go offline, I can use this to bring it back up. The Kobayashi Maru, I mean, those resupply pods are fantastic. 10% bonus damage, 10% max hull, 20 damage resistance rating, 20% max shields, 20% speed and turn rate. If you've got it from either the Mud store or from the event, I highly recommend using it. And lastly, Temporal Negotiator. This is just a thing I might throw up sometimes. I didn't really have something better to use at the moment of building the ship, so 50% Bridge Officer power recharge, always nice. But let's move on to our consoles. Because this is a Miracle Worker ship, we have 2 universal console slots, which is absolutely fantastic. So we've got Lorca's custom fire controls, again, making up that 2-piece set with our wide angle phaser beam array. And for the next one, we've got an interesting one, and I'll get into this, and this is a very specific kind of console. The Agony Redistributor, off of the Adamant. When it came out, it was bugged. If 2 people used it, it would more or less decimate everything in the beginning of, say, an Infected. It was stacking completely improperly. That's been patched. This is still a really solid console. I will bring this into an ISA or an ISE, and it will still be one of the highest damaging consoles in a Parse. Because when you use it, any damage that the entire team does to a target is going to spread to the ships around it. For example, you could use this on some of the nanite transformers, and it'll destroy the generators. It'll wipe things off of the map. It's a fun console to use, though I will say that this one really comes in handy more in elite level content when you've got things bunched together. In advanced, things don't tend to last long enough for the console to really shine as much as it should. So, if you're only running in advanced content or you're not running an ISE, you could easily replace this with some vulnerability locators or exploiters. Moving on down to the engineering consoles, we have Reinforced Armaments. Now this is another console from a mission. It's making up the 2-piece set with that Trilithium Omni we talked about before. And nice little boost to our hull restoration, hull capacity, going to help us out in survivability when we're not running with a tank. Next, we have DPRM. I don't need to go into a lot of details with this. It's the quintessential DPS console. Bonus damage, hull regen. It's got passives for directed energy weapon damage and damage resistance ratings. If you've got it, use it. Next, we've got binaural infusion circuits. This is a Lobby console. It is a huge boost to your crit severity as well as your control expertise, which will feed into a trait we'll talk about a little bit later. Next, we've got the Tholian Web Spinner Array. Now, while this one doesn't directly help a lot of things we do, it's got so much potential, which is why it's on this build. So for one, attacks against held foes gain 50% bonus damage. So every time we hit something with, say, a tractor beam, it's going to hit that much harder. Plus, its clicky is fantastic for crowd control. You use it against a group of ships that are close together, it's going to decimate them. It's fantastic. Next, we've got Interphasic Rift Generator. This is another nice console, comes off of the Mirror Warship. 15% crit severity and 15 Starship hull capacity, as well as a nice little DOT for the clicky. Filling out our science consoles, we have no actual science consoles, but first we've got the Immolating Phaser Lens. This is going to proc off another one of our traits that we'll get into later. Plus, it is a wickedly powerful console. This thing does damage. And even though the tooltip doesn't really say it right now, when we get into combat and start using it, you'll see just how devastating this weapon can be. Next, we've got Domino. This comes off of the Bajoran Interceptor. Haste, bonus damage, recharge rate, everything, and you can extend the duration of this by defeating more enemies, which is fantastic. If you've got this console either from the Bajoran Interceptor from the event, or I believe it's in the Phoenix store, and you're running a phaser build, I'd recommend it. For our tactical consoles, we're running a bunch of vulnerability exploiters, and first question I tend to get is, why are you not running the locators for crit chance? Crit chance is so much harder to get. Well, when you see us go into combat, you'll notice that I'm already getting more than enough crit chance. Most of the weapons are critting 90% of the time or more, so started focusing on severity more to get some extra damage. And lastly, the hangar bay on this ship, where it gets really interesting and things worked out oh so perfectly time-wise. We have the Elite Alliance Fighter Squadrons. These things are so much fun. Micro Anti-Proton Beam Rays, Micro Anti-Proton Pulse Cannons, but the real standout, Focused Assault 3. I love these pets, and they're going to work really well with Superior Area Denial, one of the traits we're using, which we will get into next. Moving on to our personal space traits, we've got a Good Day to Die, which lets us use Go Down Fighting and can be used at any hull integrity. And Go Down Fighting will also give a scaling buff going up to 50% hull integrity, which is super nice. Again, this is something that's really only going to apply to tactical captains. There's obviously other things you could use if you're not running on a tactical captain, but for us, having just a nice boost to our, damage without having to worry about what percentage hull we're at is a really nice to have. Moving on, we've got Adaptive Offense. This one is going to give us a nice little boost to our crit chance, and then when we critically strike something, 0.9% of our crit chance is going to become 3% critical severity, and that's going to stack up to 3 times for up to 9% crit severity. Again, so we're making use of all of our crits. Everything's going to feed into everything. Next, we've got Context is for Kings. Again, this is one that came out a couple of years ago now, but it's a great space trait. If you didn't take damage in the last second, you're going to gain some bonus damage, and if you did take damage, you're going to get some damage resistance rating. So either you're becoming tankier, or you're doing more damage. It's a win-win. Next, we've got Fleet Coordinator. This is a pretty done deal. If you're running with a team, you're getting bonus damage, and up to 10% if you've got a full team. In ISEs, great one to use. Obviously, you could trade it out if you're doing some solo content like patrols, but it's a fun one. And here we go. Fragment of AI Tech. Now, this is what all that control expertise I was talking about before leads to. You're gaining energy weapon damage based on your control expertise. Caps out at 30% at 300 expertise. Right now, we're not quite at cap, but as we go into combat, that should go up, and we should be hitting 30 most of the time. Next, we've got Intelligence Agent Attaché. On weapon critical strikes, all of our captain abilities are going to recharge just a little bit faster. So to give you an idea, that's not going to be bridge officer abilities, but it's going to be captain abilities. Things like Attack Pattern Alpha, which is great, because Attack Pattern Alpha is what make tactical captains so awesome. Almost 50% bonus damage, 5% crit chance, 50% crit severity, and 120% to flight turn rate. The more we can click Attack Pattern Alpha, the better our lives will be. Going down, we've got Superior Beam Training. This comes from K13, just a nice little bonus to our beam weapon damage. Done deal. We've got Terran Targeting Systems, giving us a boost to our crit severity, but having the trade-off of every time we take a critical hit, we're going to lose some speed. So the idea is don't get hit, but have more crit severity. Again, this is an obvious one. Boimler effect is amazing. This is an amazing trait. 17.5% chance of recovering the recharge time of all other bridge officer abilities up to their shared category cooldowns. You can get global cooldowns, and I will say in practice, I don't think I've ever even had a firing cycle outside of maybe 1 to 2% not have Boimler proc. If you haven't already gone to pick it up, I highly recommend it. When it's in the Lobby store, get it. If it's on the exchange and you have the money, buy it. You will not be disappointed. Lastly, we have unconventional systems. This is an awesome one. Control bridge officer abilities grant a 7% recharge to universal consoles. Again, universal consoles are giving us a lot of damage. Think immolating phaser lands. Think agony redistributor. Think the chain web projection. The sooner we can get those up again, the more damage we're going to be able to do. It's fantastic. All right, we've got our space traits out of the way. Now let's go to our starship traits. This is where things are going to get really fun. First off, we've got Terran Goodbye. Comes off in the Mirror Warship. I picked it up from the last meta event. Oof. This is such a fun one. When you defeat a foe, accuracy and crit chance. So, I don't know how to better explain it. You want to get as many kills as possible because this is so much fun. Accuracy, you don't want to miss, and crit chance, the more you can get, the better. Next, we've got emergency weapon cycle. So this one's another kind of simple one. I tend to use it on a lot of my phaser builds and a lot of my beam overload builds. On emergency power to weapons, getting the weapon power cost reduction as well as some firing cycle haste. Next, we've got super weapon ingenuity. So while this trait is slotted, you're increasing the duration of beam overload by 5 seconds. That's kind of a done deal. You can have more or less 100% uptime on your beam overload, which is always nice to have. Next, we've got universal designs. This comes off of the crossfield refit. This trait is either a slightly helpful or one of the best traits in the game, and it depends almost exclusively on the immolating phaser lands. When you activate a universal console, stacks up to 5 times, 2% crit chance, 10% crit severity. Every single time you fire the immolating phaser lance, it builds up a stack. And you get 6 of them. The sooner you can get that recharge too is going to help you. So, universal designs plus immolating phaser lance is a solid 10 out of 10. Next, we've got one of the stranger consoles. This one is not one you'll often see in PvE, but I've come to like it and appreciate it quite a lot. We've got Exodus Active Probat. Now this comes off of the Section 31 Intel Science Destroyer. When you activate any Intel Bridge Officer ability or jam sensors, you get a nice little boost to your stealth, you get 15% bonus weapon damage, and you get a good amount of starship control expertise. This is again going to feed into our energy weapon damage from control, giving us that 300 that we need, as well as giving us stealth, which is going to stop us from being targeted and hit by those critical strikes, and bonus weapon damage. There's no losing here. And because this has my favorite seating, Miracle Worker Intel, very similar to the Inquiry, we can make this work. And lastly, we've got Superior Area Denial. This is one that only goes on because we've got those pets. Whenever you activate Fire at Will or Scatter Volley, it'll give it to your pets, and to the target's hit, they'll lose 30 all damage resistance rating. Debuff your enemies, hit them hard. I tried taking this off a couple of times, and I could not get anything else to work. It's a fantastic trait. Comes off of the Mirror Angle Strikewing Escort, or you can get it from the 12th Anniversary Bundle. Lastly, we've got our Space Reputation. We've got Controlled Countermeasures, giving us some bonus energy weapon damage from controlled targets. We've got Tyler's Duality, again, giving us some crit chance from our hull capacity. We've got a good amount of hull on this thing, so we can make this one work. 5.1% crit chance is pretty good. Magnified Firepower. This is a done deal. Some more bonus weapon damage. And then we've got Precision. giving us 5% crit chance, and then advanced targeting systems, which is giving us 20% crit severity. Most of that stuff's pretty standard, so let's move on, shall we? Moving on to our bridge officers. Pretty standard for most of my builds. We have 3 SROs, which are all giving us crit chance and crit severity for Havrok, Verloc, and Vinar. We have a Kentari for Kentari Ferocity. And we have our Hierarchy Science Officer for that bonus damage. So, going through our abilities real quick, we've got Distributed Targeting 1. This is just sort of a fun one. It comes from the lockbox. If there's something else you want to run, you can, but I find it can be very nice, especially when things are grouped together. Attack Pattern Beta 1. This tends to go on a lot of my directed energy weapon ships, as well as most of my ships in general, when I've got the tactical space for it. Again, debuffing enemies. Nice to have. And Beam Overload 3. This is our primary firing mode. I mean, what else to say about it? Beam Overload is fun. Going to our next tactical officer, we've got Chemosite Laced Weaponry 1. So this is going to give us a radiation damage boost to torpedo hits and then have a chance of proccing on energy weapons. I believe it's 10%. So again, it's a nice little boost to our damage when it happens. We've got Torpedo High Yield 2. The heavy bimolecular photon torpedo is one of the hardest hitting in the game, and on high yield, it kills. You can use spread, but I've come to like high yield quite a bit more. And then lastly, we've got Cannon Scatter Volley 2. So this is making use of our cannons and trying to get the most damage out of them as possible. We will be getting some Cannon Scatter Volley 3s as well, and we'll get into that when we move on to our duty officers. For our intel seating. So, as you guys know, they recently buffed the intel specialization, which is absolutely awesome. So, Intel Team 1 is more than enough for our stealth, and then we've got override subsystem safeties. So, again, we're going to max out our power levels as much as we can. It feeds into everything. The more we can max our power, the better we're going to be. And, with any luck, we can cancel out a lot more of its negative effects with things that we'll get into a little bit later. Moving on to our engineer, we've got emergency power to weapons 1. Again, some bonus energy weapon. Only reason why it's not higher is because of the miracle worker abilities that we're going to need that we'll get into in a second. We've got aux power to the emergency battery. This is just going to be a little bit of extra cooldown reduction in the unlikely case that Boimler doesn't proc, or just to speed things up just a little bit more. And then lastly, for our Miracle Worker abilities, for directed energy weapons, again, a done deal. Narrow Sensor Bands 3, bonus damage based on how close to our target we are, and then Mixed Armament Synergy 3, which is giving us bonus damage when weapons fire. When our cannons are firing, we're getting bonus damage for our beams. When beams fire, we're getting bonus damage for our cannons. It's nice. And then lastly, for our Science Seat, we've got Tractor Beam 1, feed into controlled countermeasures, and just give us one more ability. Lastly, moving on to our duty officers, we have an energy weapon officer, which gives us a chance for beam overload to cause all attacks against the target to gain 35% shield penetration. Again, first shot with beam overload, it's a 30% chance, which is pretty good, and shield pen is always nice. Next, we've got our first Borg bridge officer. 15% chance setting power levels to maximum for 5 seconds when activating a tactical ability, and then a 30% chance of improving our critical chance by 2.5% on Miracle Worker abilities. Solid procs, and we've got a good chance of getting all this stuff to activate, so it's a good one. So, now we've got a chance to gain some crit chance when firing energy weapons. I would like to have the purple one. They are very expensive, so I went for a blue one here. Not quite as expensive, and it's still a pretty good one. Next, we've got 19 of 47. Engineering abilities, 15% chance of setting our power levels to max again. Miracle Worker, 30% chance of improving weapon armor penetration by 20. So, you'll notice that both of them are for power levels. Obviously, Miracle Worker that tracks, but it has a second purpose. When we set our power levels to maximum, if Override Subsystem Safeties has knocked a subsystem offline, this will cancel it out. When a subsystem goes offline, it'll just set that subsystem to 0, and if you max it out, cancels it out immediately. So, it's a nice little plan against that. Moving on, we've got one of the new duty officers from the Emerald Chain lockbox. This is a weapons expert that has a 25% chance on using an energy weapon firing mode 1 or 2 to use 2 or 3 instead. So when we're activating our cannon Scatter Volley 2, we've now got a 25% chance of getting Scatter Volley 3. Why I really like the outlook of this build is because this is one where you can have Beam Overload 3 and Scatter Volley 3. And it's been working pretty well so far. And for our last slot, we've got an Oxtabat duty officer to make our cooldown reduction work on our Oxtabat ability. So, taking a quick look at our bar, again, it's pretty simple for what I do. I tried to activate Beam Overload and our Cannon Scatter Volley as early as possible, and then after that, it's most of the same. Try to buff up stuff as much as possible first, and then go into our hard-hitting stuff. So, now that we've taken a look at the ship, let's take it into a wanted and see its damage output.
Looks like our fight got them to notice us. Let's go over and ask if their boss might come out of hiding. We have the suspect in custody now.
And as you saw, this ship absolutely tore through that patrol. Without a problem. So now we're going to take it into something just a little bit harder. Something with waves and waves of enemies. To see how it fares against that and how well its intel team is helping it with damage mitigation as well as threat mitigation. So let's head into a rescue and search and see how it goes.
Good to see you, my friend. We can ponder. We did it. Sensors are clear.
That rift's unstable. We need to hurry, or those...
Klingon vessels are warping.
And once again, this ship proves just how versatile it is, managing to get through this patrol without dying a single time. So, I think it's worth looking into exactly how much damage potential we can get out of this ship. So, what we're going to do now is bring this into an infected advanced. Now, we're going to do it solo, and we're going to see what our weapons are doing and how well they are performing. So let's get queued up for an infected the Conduit on advanced, run a damage log, and see what this ship is really capable of. Let's do it.
The situation is grim. Oh, there's... Sensors confirm that the transport conduit.
So, as you saw, in an infected alone, it did go down once, but it was able to put out some serious damage. So, let's just go on ahead and take a look at that damage parse. Taking a look at our damage parse here, we can see overall we did 225.2k DPS, which is pretty respectable given we were all alone in that ISA. Looking at all of our weapons, we'll see that most of our crit rates were at 80% or above. You know, the phaser wide angle was critting 80% of the time, phaser arrays critting 82% of the time, immolating phaser lens even critting 83% of the time, which is fantastic given how long that run was. We'll see that we're also doing a pretty good amount of damage from Beam Overload 3, but if you move a little bit farther down, you'll also see the Enhanced Biomolecular Photon Torpedo getting in some nice hits, as well as a max one hit of 351,000, and you will see both Scatter Volley 2 and Scatter Volley 3 as they procced off, which is exactly what we like to see. Moving on to our pets, we see that the Nanite Transformer was the highest damaging. To give some explanation, this is from the Agony Redistributor console. When I hit the Nanite Transformer with that console, it itself was doing damage to all the things around it, making up just about 8,000 DPS of our total damage, and doing just under 1.7 million damage throughout the entire run, which is very, very nice. We also see tons of different attacks from the Elite Alliance Fighter Squadrons, which were putting in some serious work, as well as the Delta Alliance reinforcements we called in during the second half of the run. So overall, our pets were putting in work, and so were all of our weapons. Overall, this ship has thoroughly surprised me with just how well it performs. Its combination of Merrick Worker and Intel seating lends itself to what I can only say is one of the best ships I've played with in the game for directed energy weapons. It's bulky, it's slow, but it can put out a ton of firepower, and it's got some great survivability. Overall, I'd rank the survivability at an 8 out of 10, and its damage potential also as an 8 out of 10, giving this thing an overall of a B, which for a Zen store ship that hit the store for just 3,000 Zen is absolutely fantastic. I would say if you've got a T6 coupon sitting around, or you've got Zen burning a hole in your pocket, this is a ship I would recommend. It's a ton of fun. It's a budget inquiry, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Let me know what you guys think, though, down in the comments. Do you like the Lexington Class Dreadnought? And let me know if you would change anything about this ship. Would you change its specializations? Maybe its weapon layout? What would you do to make this a better ship? Check out my other video doing a visual overview of this vessel, and I will see you next time. As always, you have been live with Endeavor Gaming, and remember to keep calm and game on.